Hello, everyone. Good evening. Sorry I missed last week. Something came up, I just couldn't do it. But hello and welcome back. I didn't put a post in the group, obviously, because I had all the questions left over from last week. So I shall crack straight on with them. First one, when does the focus on eating ice cream sweets stop? It is in my head all the time and seem to have replaced alcohol thoughts. Well, it stops when you stop thinking about it, and in fact, not thinking about it, when you stop craving about it. What I write about cravings applies equally to any craving, including ice cream and sweets. I quite often say to people, if you're in the first few days or weeks of stopping, then don't worry too much about what you're eating. Just concentrate on not drinking. But there does come a point where you probably want to have a think about your diet, because the problem is that overeating and comfort eating is in many ways like drinking. It's not very pleasurable and deeply frustrating, and has lots of downsides. So if your goal is to be living the best life you can, you probably want to think about sorting your eating out as well. So go back to all the things I have written about cravings and start applying it to sweets. And obviously there is diet and fitness explained as well. So hi William, what are your thoughts about the phrase connection is the opposite of addiction, please? So I've always kind of struggled with that phrase because it isn't. You probably all know me well by now. I'm quite literal. Um, the opposite of connection is isolation. Maybe I'm taking it too literally, but for me, addiction is a chemical and or psychological dependency on a drug. Doesn't need to be a drug. There are other things, but let's talk about drug addiction specifically. So it's a chemical or physical and or psychological addiction to a drug. The opposite of that, I don't, is not connection. It maybe doesn't have an opposite, but the closest to an opposite, I think, is freedom. Addiction suggests you're compelled to do something that you don't want to do. Freedom, and in particular freedom of choice, is the opposite of that. Someone put in, extending on from that, your thoughts on a TED talk from Johan Hari. I did actually watch it, and it kind of develops this theme. And there's a few things in there that was quite interesting. Essentially, the thrust of it is that addiction comes from not being connected with people. Um, and unless I'm misunderstanding it, goes so far as to say if you're connected with people, you won't become addicted. And he quotes as an example, he talks about heroin addiction, and he mentions that, I forget the name of the drug, but if you go into hospital for an operation or something, you're given a painkiller, you're given, he claims, very pure quality opium or heroin, and in fact probably better quality and purer heroin than people buy on the streets. And you may have it for weeks or even months, and yet people will take that in hospital and then leave the hospital and be absolutely fine. He talks also about, this is another interesting one, rats that are put in cages on their own with a drug in a water bottle and just water in a water bottle will very soon become addicted to the drug and keep taking it until they die. But when they're put into a situation where they're not on their own, there's other rats and, more importantly, other things to occupy them, they leave the drug alone and concentrate on the water. So there's that. There's the people in hospital, and he also mentions as well, which is again an interesting point, in Vietnam, the war in Vietnam. So lots and lots of the soldiers were taking drugs, and in particular heroin, and there was a big concern in America that when these soldiers returned, there was going to be this massive influx of heroin addicts. But interesting, a lot of them returned and just quit with no particular problem and just went back to normal life. So the conclusions he draws is that it's all to do with connection. If you're connected to someone, if you're connected, you can't get addicted, essentially. And no, I don't agree with that at all. I think so. Talking about rats are simpler than humans, and they are social creatures. Okay, so if they are connected and happy, then I've no doubt they feel fairly content. But people aren't that simple. If you have got someone who loves to be around people and struggles to not be around people, then like anything else, if you take someone like that and you starve them of company and they don't feel connected, then the same as if someone has suffered from trauma or a mental health issue or anxiety or depression or anything like that, they don't feel good. And taking a drug, any drug, is one of many ways they can manage that not feeling good feeling. Um, Alcohol is an easy option, of course, because it's a freely available sedative that you don't need a prescription for. You can go and buy as much as you possibly want of it. So people tend to gravitate towards problem drinking, but the problem is not everyone's like that. Some people don't like being around other people. Some people thrive in their own company. So it may be the case for some people that feeling unconnected can make them more prone to addiction, but it's certainly not the case with everyone. Um, so I'm perfect. So I've got two sons. My eldest son is 10, and he hates being on his own. He'll constantly be pestering people to do stuff with him. He can't spend a minute on his own. My other son, my younger one, he's like I was at that age, and he's just more than happy to spend hours and hours in his own company. I like being in my own company. I went into work today. It's a bit of a strange thing. There's something like 8 million people in London, and yet I find I have the most time alone when I'm commuting into the city to work, because there's a lot of people in London, but they're all very reserved and nobody ever talks to anyone. So commuting into London and spending a day in the office, I think I spoke to one person throughout the entire course of the day. I had the day alone. And I feel much better for it. The thing I struggled most with lockdown, funnily enough, was having people around me all day, every day, and not having any time to myself. So my point is here, I don't think it's true for everyone. That there are people out there who either are better off on their own or certainly need company, but in just very small doses. Um, and I think those kind of people, this doesn't really apply to. But if you are someone who's really outgoing and you struggle to not be with other people all the time, then yes, that may be, as I say, along with other things, something that may make you gravitate towards addiction. When we're talking about people taking heroin in hospital, that's a very interesting one. But for me, I would suggest an alternative solution to that, and that's craving. Because don't forget, addiction is part physical, but a big chunk of it is craving. It's that craving process. And in fact, I go out of my way to say to people, drugs like alcohol and nicotine, they have a withdrawal, and they have a withdrawal from the very first dose. But the reason we aren't addicted from the very first dose is because when that withdrawal kicks in, okay, admittedly, firstly, it's maybe not as strong as it will be in a few years or months' time or whatever, when your body starts to really incorporate it. But forget that for a minute. It's because in the early stages, we don't associate having another dose of the drug with relieving the withdrawal. So when we start drinking, the drink wears off, we have a sort of a niggly, unpleasant, anxious feeling. But that's just what we have. Lots of things can make us unhappy or anxious, and we just carry on with life and get through it. It's when we start to realize on a conscious and a subconscious level that when that kicks in, actually, if we have another drink, it relieves it. That's where the addiction kicks in. And it's the same for smoking. Smoking is addictive, but nobody gets, or not, it's unusual to be addicted from your very first cigarette. Some people smoke for months, just on social occasions, just at weekends, before they start to smoke all the time. And the difference there is that learning process, that when one cigarette starts to wear off, it creates a desire for the next one. The feeling is there, but it takes time for your mind to kick in. And another thing I've spoken about several times is obviously certainty. Now, alcohol, more than any other drug, we have very specific rules about when we will or won't drink. So if you've drunk 2 bottles of wine the night before and you wake up in the morning feeling rubbish, you absolutely will feel a whole world better if you have a couple of glasses of wine. But for most of us, we don't drink in the morning. We've got to get the kids up, we've got to get to work, we've got to do this, that, and the other. So for most people, you don't wake up and think, cool, I really want a drink. If only I could have a drink. Because we don't drink. We don't waste a second even thinking about it. So we wake up full alcohol withdrawal, but we'll go all the way through the day and wait till the evening until we can relieve that withdrawal. And that's certainly, it's just we don't waste time craving about it. But when the time comes, when the evening comes and it's our time to drink and we are allowed to drink, that's when we become really fixated with it and can't stop thinking about it. So if you've got someone in hospital and you're giving them a painkiller, and they have it for a few months, and then usually they're weaned off anyway, so there will be that feeling, but it will be an unpleasant feeling. But it would never dawn on them to pop out to their local, I don't know, drug dealer and buy a load of heroin and start injecting it. It just wouldn't cross their mind. So they just put up with the withdrawal. They don't feel particularly good, but they've probably not been well anyway. So it's all mixed up into the same thing. And they get through it. The thing about the Vietnamese in Vietnam and the troops returning, I think kind of almost highlighted the problem with the theory, because obviously I wasn't in Vietnam. I'm not quite that old, but I did serve in Iraq. And obviously I can't speak about everyone's experience, but my experience of serving in Iraq was being out there was the most connected and belonging I have ever felt in my life. You're with people you might not choose to spend a moment with in normal life, and suddenly you are with them literally 24 hours a day for 6 months in some of the most horrendous, unpleasant, nasty situations you can imagine, and you just rely on each other the whole time. You can dislike people, you can like people, but you have this massively strong bond with them. And one of the things that's difficult when you come back to civilian life is that disappears. That very close relationship you have with people disappears. So actually, it would be the other way around. If it was the connection that was preventing the addiction, those soldiers would not be taking the heroin when they were in Vietnam. They'd be taking it when they came back, because it's when you come back that closeness, that people you've lived and breathed with, literally they've not been away from you in 6 months, not for a moment, they're gone. And that's one of the things that you kind of struggle with when you return from these things. People think it's the stuff you do out there. It's not. It's the transitioning from a very, very close, or you know exactly where you are, what you have to do all the time, and going back to what feels like a very loose and ad hoc way of living your life. So I think that, again, that kind of misinterprets it, because, as I say, certainly my experience is being out and serving in those kind of situations is the most connected you will feel in your entire life. And it's returning where you feel that disconnect. And obviously it was when they were taking the drugs that they were out there, and it was coming back where they stopped, which I think again kind of highlights the craving. You know, these people were out there, they were taking the drugs, telling themselves it was just in that difficult situation, and then they went back, probably certainly knowing, well, I'm going back, no, I'm not going to take this drug anymore. And that certainty, that lack of craving, was probably what pulled them through. So let me be very specific about this. I've no doubt that connection is very important for people who need to be connected to others, but I don't think um, it's the sort of simple answer it's made out to be. And I don't, again, just at a very practical level, I don't see connection being the opposite of addiction, because the opposite of connection is isolation. Some people thrive on isolation and feel, you know, unhappy if they're not isolated. So reading Alcohol Explained 2 now, I was doing so well and became very complacent. That will never happen again, and wondering why I'm having a harder time of it the second time round. Is this an after effect of becoming complacent? So I think there's a few points to make here. One is that the natural tendency when we quit drinking is we keep trying and we keep trying and we keep trying, and we feel like rotten and miserable and all the rest of it. And then when we quit, a few things happen, one of which our brain chemistry goes back to normal. And whether you think you're a confident person or an unconfident person or resilient or not resilient, you will be at your very best at that point when your brain chemistry goes back to normal. You'll also be sleeping better, and that will have a massive effect on how mentally strong you feel. So within quite a short space of time, we start to feel much better than we ever did. And it's very easy then to think, wow, it's so good to stop. I don't know why I ever did it for so long. And I think there's a tendency to then start to think it was easier than it was. You tend to forget the weeks or months that you were constantly waking up feeling rubbish because you're still drinking, not quite getting it before it clicks into place. When you go back into that cycle, it can appear that the second time round is more difficult. But I think for a lot of people, if they analyze it and think about the first time and how long it took before it actually clicked into place, it's probably kind of similar. Another point is, it is unfortunately the case that I think when you come across something new like Alcohol Explained or anything really, any other method equally the same, when you quit, it can feel, what you're really doing with these things is you're opening your mind up to seeing alcohol slightly differently and seeing not drinking slightly differently, seeing sobriety slightly differently. And I think then when you start again, it can be like, oh wow, this is interesting, this is new, and you're kind of fired up for this new life. Then you start again and you go back to the book or the the system, whatever it was, and it's not so effective the second time round because it's old information, so you kind of know it. So I think it's a kind of a mixture of the two. The other point I think is you need to remember, and people kind of forget this, when we aren't feeling 100%, there's a very pronounced tendency to put off anything difficult. Okay, so and that's perfectly natural. That's just nature's way. If an animal is injured or ill in some way, it shouldn't be going out fighting and seeking new territory and all the rest of it. It needs to be hiding away. So we as humans just have this very strong desire to put off difficult things when we're not feeling well. Think about, I don't know, having something really difficult to do at work and you haven't slept the night before and you're feeling really ill. You just don't want to do it. You want to put it off until you feel better. And that's one of the problems with drinking and all drug addiction. We feel at our worst when the withdrawals at its highest. So what happens is we say, I want to stop, and we stop, and the withdrawal kicks in and we feel absolutely rubbish. And so there's a very pronounced tendency to put off anything difficult. And what's the most difficult thing we're doing at this moment? Quitting our drug of choice. So it becomes extremely difficult and very easy to put off. And I think that's something else you need to bear in mind. You need to guard against that tendency, because that's the psychology behind it. I will quit, but just not tonight. Tonight is not the right time. And that's the problem. The withdrawal makes every moment inherently seem like the wrong time. And you just think, I can do it, but just not now. So we just keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And suddenly weeks and months have gone by. And you're thinking, why can't I get it this second time? You need to be aware of that. And it is difficult, but when you're feeling rubbish, you just have to stick with it, knowing that it's short term and it won't last. I've seen a lot of people struggling around 460 alcohol free. Is this complacency? And what do you suggest? Well, obviously, fading effect bias and ambition will kick in. Fading effect bias is when we look back on past events more positively than when they actually happened. Rose tinted spectacles is essentially what it is. And ambition is the desire, the drive to do better, made up of two distinct tendencies: the tendency to be critical of what we have and the tendency to idolize what we don't have. So when we quit drinking, we very quickly take our far improved quality of life for granted. And we start to think that, oh, wasn't drinking wonderful? What do I suggest? I suggest you be realistic and accept the fact that what you're pining for never existed to begin with. And this is this to me is one of the the central miseries of addiction. We don't like drinking because it's foul, frankly. You're exhausted, you're tired, you're anxious, you feel horrible all the time. And the only time you don't feel like that is for the few hours a day when you're heavily sedated by taking more of the drug that's causing all the problems. It's no way to live. What a waste of a life. So what do? We quit. And we immediately feel better and everything's great. But after a few days, weeks, months, this highly elevated quality of life becomes normal. And we humans are phenomenally good at taking things for granted. So all of a sudden, we forget all the misery of drinking. We just sit there thinking, oh, I used to really like having a drink on this or that occasion. Okay, so we were drinking and we're miserable. We've stopped drinking and we're miserable. So we go back to drinking. But the problem is, when you're not drinking, you fantasize about how great it was. You think about these wonderful drinks you had on this occasion or that occasion, or this drink that you really made you feel good, or whatever it was. And you forget all the reality of it, all the waking up at 4 a.m, the anxiety and the exhaustion. But the problem is, when you start again, you're not going back to the fantasy, you're going back to the reality. So, and that to me is one of the worst parts of it. It literally ruins people's lives, because if they don't go about it the right way, they're miserable. If they're miserable drinking, they're probably less miserable not drinking, but they're certainly not happy. So they go back to drinking thinking it was this wonderful thing, and of course it isn't. It's horrible. So they're stuck in the rut again, and then trying to stop. So that's what I would suggest. What do you think about this idea of hypnotherapy to quit drinking? I know Craig Beck, for example, is a proponent of this, but I think even he suggested it only works for a select group of people. But according to him, people that have the capacity to be hypnotized have a great success rate. So I read that, and my immediate thought was, I don't know much about hypnotherapy. What I know of it, it's a method of communicating information, and methods of communicating information are extremely dependent on the recipient. So I would think that, but actually someone has here answered the question far better than I ever could. Being a qualified clinical hypnotherapist, someone has to want to be hypnotized and want change. Also, generic recordings, such as Craig's recording, The Tree of Energy, etc., that featured in his Alcohol Lied to Me, is all very well, but people's minds all work differently. So certainly wordings may help some, but not others. Essentially, it needs to be personalized by an experienced professional for a trance session to be most successful. We all go through some form of self-hypnosis during the day, on waking and sleeping, for instance, and a clinical hypnotherapist is only a facilitator that guides change. Building rapport between client and therapist is key. I mean, to me, that makes perfect sense and answers the question far better than I ever could. So thank you very much for rescuing me. What do you think about targets like 1 year to aim for? I personally found the last few weeks coming up to 12 months quite testing, whereas I found months 4 to 11 easy peasy. I would welcome your thoughts on this. So don't get too fixated with time for a start, because saying I found this period easy and that period difficult, I would hazard a guess that was more to do what was going on in your life, rather than everybody suffers. For example, 4 to 11 is easy and month 12 is hard. So certainly after you, outside of the first week or so, the brain chemistry will be back to normal. And then after, 5 to 6 weeks is at the outside limit, is when that exhaustion starts to disappear. You start to catch up on missed sleep. So anything after that is going to be largely psychological. So you may find a bit easy or a bit difficult, depending on things like fading effect bias and ambition. It depends what you're thinking about. The problem I would have with targets to aim for, so there's no right or wrong to this, and I quite often advise people who are really struggling to just get the first few. So set yourself a time limit. I'm just going to do 5 days, because it can just be too much trying to quit knowing that you're going to do it forever. So quite a lot of the time I say to people, just concentrate on getting through 5 days sober. That's it. Not that you'll drink again after that, but that's all you're concentrating on, and then you'll stop, rethink, and see where you are, because the world looks very different after 5 days for everyone. If you're a very, very heavy drinker, you'll still be feeling rubbish, but you'll be feeling a whole world better than when you were drinking at that point. It will really start to be falling into place then. And I know a lot of people quit that way. A lot of people say to themselves, I'm going to do dry January, and they stop, and they kind of like it. So they say, oh, I'll do another month or another 2 months, and they go for a year, and that morphs eventually into long-term sobriety. And I know a couple of people. So Dawn did that. And Sharon Hartley did it that way as well. So there's a lot of people that have built very strong sobrieties, starting off by doing a month, 2 months, and sort of building on it. So if it works, do it, because the key here is not to do it in a certain way, it's to get it done. What I would only say about that, and this is one of the issues I have when people say, take 1 day at a time and, just concentrate on this. I think At some point, you have to make a decision about what you're doing with your life. Okay. But more importantly than that, for me, the key to not drinking is to see alcohol as it really is, stripped of all the hype and nonsense. Okay. Just, it's a chemical. It feels like it has control over us, but it has no control over us at all. It only has control over us because we keep wanting it. Um, and if you see it for just a foul tasting sedative that will make you feel slightly dulled before wearing off, leaving a corresponding feeling of anxiety that will accelerate your heart rate and therefore make you feel heavy and lethargic and ruin your sleep, that's all there is to it. Why would you be saying, oh, I'm just going to aim for a year, I'm just going to, similar thing, like if you were riddled with cancer, um, and you were suddenly given a cure for it and you were operated on it and you were free, you wouldn't be sat there thinking, right, I'm going to do my first day without cancer and then I'm going to go for a year with it. You're free. Just get on with your life and enjoy it. So I don't have a specific problem with these targets, but it always sounds to me like it kind of, it's symptomatic of an underlying issue that you still can't envisage the rest of your life without a drink, and the only reason you can't do that is because there's still something in there that's making you think there's a great pleasure in drinking. So you're kind of just using, like, just today, just today, just today, and that's really why I have an issue with it. But let me caveat all of that by saying it's always better to not be drinking. Okay, so however you go about not drinking, it's always better to not be drinking than be drinking. It's just, for me, and I know for a lot of other people, certain ways of doing it can make it far more enjoyable. Can you explain what GABA is using one of your wonderful analogies? I don't know what it is. I looked it up and it says it blocks or inhibits certain brain signals and decreases activity in your nervous system. When GABA attaches to a protein in your brain known as GABA reactor, it produces a calming effect. This can help with feelings of anxiety, stress, and fear. So my take on that is it's one of the naturally occurring chemicals in your brain, and it calms you down and makes you feel relaxed. So I don't. That, I hope that's enough. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be talking more about it, but that's that for that one. What car do you drive when you brake with your left foot? You must have an old version of the book because I amended that. I can't remember, quite a while ago. So you've probably got one of the first editions, I think. Hi, William. Annie Grace has written in This Naked Mind that the risk for children to get addicted to alcohol as adults is 4 times as high if one of their parents is an alcoholic. Isn't this statement in contradiction to the message that there's no genetic reason for alcohol addiction? Well, no, not at all. Because it's not just genes we get from our parents, it's behaviours as well, isn't it? I mean, so my 2 sons speak English. That's not a genetic thing. My wife and I speak English to them and they learn English. If they were adopted at birth by a German couple and went to live in Berlin, they wouldn't grow up speaking English and not understanding a word they were spoken to. If children grow up in a household where every social event has got alcohol, every time they see their parents stressed, they see them reaching for a drink to alleviate that stress. If they see every argument being, people sitting down having a drink, Christmas celebrations, everything, you're sending a clear message to those children. We drink, we drink, we drink, we celebrate with it, we socialize with it, we relax of an evening with it, we drink on holiday, we drink on all these occasions, and they grow up copying you. Not all of them by any means, but a lot of them do. And that's the problem. It's not a genetic thing at all. It's just learnt behavior. Wondering if you have any advice for handling a marriage when one spouse becomes non-drinker and the other one drinks heavily, when for years, decades, drinking was a shared activity and now there is a void. When the drinking spouse is disappointed to have lost their drinking partner and feels judged, and the sober one is concerned, sad, irritated, bored when her partner is in his cups. This is a very real issue. So relationships need lots and lots of things to survive. You need to have, respect and love and all the rest of it, but you need to have some kind of common interest. Now, if that common interest is alcohol and you remove that, then it really depends on what is left as to whether that relationship will survive. Because you can still have a relationship with someone if you're not drinking and they are, but it is going to be more difficult because there has to be more to it than that. So what I always say is, when the alcohol's removed, what is left? Is there enough love, respect, and common interest between those two people to make a relationship? It will be a slightly different type of relationship, be a new dynamic, but does that exist? If yes, then the relationship hopefully will survive. If no, then it probably won't. I know personally two people who've been in that situation, and both of them have ended up leaving their partners when they've stopped drinking. It doesn't happen for everyone. The other thing is, we like to tell ourselves that drinking is, very sophisticated, but it isn't. And when you're drunk, you're fairly repulsive. Your eyes blur over. You just don't look nice. You can't speak properly. You're irritating. You repeat yourself over and over again. It's not attractive, despite what we're sold. So that can hurt things drastically as well, because I think when one person sobers up, it's not a pleasant thing. It's certainly not a romantic thing to see their partner drinking. So it can be extremely difficult. But as I say, I think the fact of the matter is, you need to find some kind of commonality there that isn't reliant on alcohol. And it may feel very sad, but really, drug addiction is not a good basis for a relationship at the end of the day. Remove the drug, there should be something stronger than just, we happen to be addicted to the same substance and we're going to sit around relieving our withdrawal pangs all day long, and that's what we have. So it's really very difficult to say. The one thing though is, the drinking partner feels judged. See, this is one of the things, and I can't emphasize this enough. I think everybody who drinks knows it's not good for them. Okay, no matter how much they may hide that, they know they wake up with their heart thudding and their mouth dry, and they wake up in the night and can't sleep and they don't feel right. But they do it because they can't, they don't believe they can enjoy weekends without drinking, or social occasions, or holidays, or Christmas. If one person can stop and actually can demonstrate that they are enjoying themselves, that they go out to social occasions and enjoy themselves, they enjoy their weekends, they enjoy Christmas, and do all of these things enjoying themselves, like not stopping begrudgingly and sitting around moping all day and taking one day at a time, but actually going out and enjoying life, you can plant a seed in people's minds to think, you know what, if I can enjoy myself without drinking, why am I putting up with all this rubbish from it? Why am I putting up with all this downside? And that can be the thing sometimes to make them stop drinking as well, which of course, that's the ideal situation. You both stop. And then again, you've still got that thing of having to find some kind of commonality, but you've probably got a lot better chance of doing that if one of you is, if both of you are not drinking. I hope that was useful, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and I shall hopefully be seeing you next week. Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye.